Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for FMT's NetSuite Year-End Close Training. My name is Lucas Darling, and I'm an account executive here at FMT Consultants, and I'm joined by one of our very own NetSuite consultants, Joe Lippert. For those of you who aren't familiar with FMT, I'd like to just take a few moments to give you a brief introduction of our company. Here at FMT, we've completed over 1,000 projects. We've been in business since 1995, and since then have become Southern California's leading provider of integrated solutions and currently have over 285 clients both in the U.S. as well as Canada. Our team has grown to over 80 team members located in northern San Diego as well as Los Angeles. At FMT, we pride ourselves on our 5 core values, which we like to hold ourselves to every day. Those are integrity, service excellence, collaboration, innovation, and passion. With the combination of talent, experience, and methodology, we are fully dedicated to the success of our company. We offer a wide array of services pertaining to ERP, CRM, SharePoint, BI, and Office 365. In addition to having extremely experienced consultants, we also have a dedicated help desk that offers ongoing training and support once projects are completed. Here are just a few of our clients we get the privilege to work with on a daily basis. You should have also received a NetSuite Year-End Training Manual via email, but if you did not, I have put a link in the manual in the chat box. Now I'm going to hand it over to Joe, but before I do, if at any point during the presentation you have a question, feel free to type them into the comment box and we'll be monitoring it during the entire presentation and we'll answer them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Welcome, everyone. My name is Joe Lippert. This presentation will be composed of 3 parts: a PowerPoint presentation, a demonstration performed in NetSuite in our demo environment, and then we'll follow and close with a question and answer session. First off, let's go into a general topic overview. Looking at the slides, we have general permissions required for period close management, accounts receivable closing, accounts payable closing, fixed asset closing, lock all closing, resolving date period mismatches, inventory close steps, general ledger closing, accounting period closing, and accounting period management. Please note some users may have additional close tasks depending on the modules enabled in their NetSuite environment. FMT will be discussing the standard close task available in both standard and one-world environments. If you have questions on additional close tasks, please contact FMT and we'd be happy to assist you. So diving into our first topic, required permissions. In order to perform a period close task in NetSuite, the user role will be required to have the following permissions, and those are manage accounting periods and allow non-GL changes. Additionally, there's a best practice in limiting the application of permissions to users' roles. We recommend that these accounting period management permissions are applied to positions such as accounting managers or controllers. Our second topic is the accounts receivable close tasks. The first step in performing the accounts receivable close in NetSuite requires posting of all transactions for the closing period in that month. When entering transactions into NetSuite, it's important to consider a concept of cutoff and transaction date versus posting date. Cutoff relates to posting transactions in the correct accounting period, whereas transaction date versus posting periods, let's dive into that more. Both fields are available on the AR transaction record. You'll typically want to ensure that the transaction date aligns with the posting period. For example, the transaction may have a date of December 13th, 2016 and a posting period of December 2016. Please note the accounting preferences can have an impact on the behavior of NetSuite when posting dates do not align with the transaction date. And this is an important concept. For instance, if you have a date outside of or misaligned with the posting period, and you're running reports, somebody's running reports by transaction date, they'll see one set of results, whereas if somebody's running reports by posting periods, they'll see a secondary or a different set of results. So it's important to have transaction date and posting period aligned. So after all the transactions have been posted to the period, we'll want to perform our reporting for the period. This way we ensure that nothing changes after the fact. To access these reports, navigate to Reports, Customers and Receivables, and select the desired reports, such as the Accounts Receivable Aging or the AR Register. Additionally, the users can access the sales tax reports at period end. To access these reports, navigate to Reports, Sales Tax US, and select the desired reports. Next, it's important to perform customer record management. This involves reviewing the activity on the customer records. and determine if they should remain active or inactive, or if information on the customer record should be updated as necessary. Next, we'll want to review the customer AR aging for collectability. If transactions will not be collectible, the user should perform the appropriate write-off transactions to remove those transactions from the aging report to have a realistic AR aging balance. And the final step of this process is to perform the accounts receivable close task, or locking task rather, which I'll show you in the period close checklist with a demonstration to follow.
So the third topic is accounts payable close task. Similar to AR that we just discussed, you're going to want to make sure that all your AP transactions are posted in the correct period, the closing month that we're at hand. You also want to consider the concept of cutoff and transaction date and posting period. So example, again, you'd want to have the vendor bill entered on December 13th, 2016 and have the posting period relate to December 2016. After the transactions have been posted to the period, we're able to also review reports here. To access these reports, navigate to Reports, Vendors/Payables, and then select your desired reports. After viewing reports, we'll also want to perform vendor record management here. Again, considering which vendors you want to have active versus inactive, and which vendor records pieces of information on the vendor record you'd want to consider updating. Once this is complete, we can view the 1099 reporting. Typically, this is best performed at the end of the year. As we know, 1099 reporting occurs on a cash basis. So we'll want to ensure that our vendor record is flagged to be eligible for a 1099s and that we have a correct EIN or tax ID on the vendor record. Further, we'll want to make sure on our GL account setup screen, the 1099 box, the applicable box has been assigned, and that those are on the pertinent transactions. To access the 1099 reports, we're going to navigate to Reports, Sales Tax US, Form 1099 MIS, and Form 1096 for a summary. And then finally, we'll perform our period close checklist task for the accounts payable, and that opens up our next topic, which is fixed assets. So for fixed assets, there's not actually a close task in the period close checklist, but FMT, we did want to speak to the best accounting practice related to fixed assets, as it is an important part of a period close. So when you're performing these tasks, if you have the fixed assets module, you can perform those fixed asset tasks directly in NetSuite using those transactions. And if you don't have the fixed assets module, you can certainly calculate all those fixed asset transactions outside of the system and then perform them in NetSuite, reperform them, import them, however you want to get those into the system. Again, these fixed asset transactions include acquisitions, depreciation, disposals, transfers, revaluations, things of that nature. So if we're using the NetSuite fixed asset module, we want to go ahead and perform depreciation for GAAP and tax basis depreciation if applicable. It's a good time for year-end to perform both. After the fixed asset activity for the period has been recorded, we are now able to run through the reporting for the period. For example, if you wanted to, if you have the fixed assets module and you wanted to review a asset roll forward report, I can show you under assets, fixed assets, save search as asset register, how that report can be used for a roll forward. If you do not have the fixed asset module in NetSuite, you'd have to refer to your balance sheet or develop a separate report / save search. Okay, so after that's complete, we're able to do our lock all task, which this is actually, it's more of an additional layer of security once accounts receivable and accounts payable and the fixed asset task has been performed. And we're able to individually make sure those are all locked. Again, we'll review this in the demonstration to follow, but it's an additional layer of closure. Following the lock all task, our sixth task relates to resolving date period mismatches. As discussed previously with both AR and AP, the purpose of this task is to ensure that the transaction dates and posting periods are all in agreement for the month being closed. Again, for example, if one employee were running a report by transaction date and another employee were running a report by posting period, and those two fields were not in agreement on the transaction, we would have a mismatch and a difference in our values returned in reporting. I'd also like to note, to prevent this from occurring in the future, there's a setting in accounting preferences to allow it's called the allow transaction date outside of posting period. And you can go ahead and set that to disallow or warn, whichever works best for your company. And again, that's in accounting preferences near the top of general ledger section. We'll be reviewing the performance of the period close checklist task for the resolve date period mismatch, and I'll show you an example of that in our demonstration to follow. Okay, so inventory closure is our 7th topic, broad topic. The first step into performing inventory closure requires posting all the transactions for the closing period of that month. That relates back to our AP closing task and our AR task. We want to ensure that all of our vendor bills are in the system, all of our item receipts are in the system, as well as all of our item fulfillments and invoices have been entered. With that, it's closely tied to our concept of cutoff and transaction date versus posting period, which we've talked about enough. After all those transactions have been entered into NetSuite for the period being closed, we'll want to begin our reconciliation of inventory. This process involves performing an inventory count to determine the physical inventory quantities at all locations, and then performing any adjustments in NetSuite to ensure that the physical count matches the quantities in NetSuite. Looking specifically at the period close checklist task, our first checklist task will be reviewing any negative inventory values, and we'll correct those where applicable. With this, we'll be able to update the values to equal to our inventory count that was just performed. I'll show you an example of that in our period close task to follow. The second checklist close task for inventory is reviewing inventory cost accounting to ensure that the correct cost accounting is maintained when transactions have been inserted or removed from an existing series of transactions. So for that, assume that you have an existing set of inventory-related transactions, and then at some point in time you've maybe inserted purchases or sales transactions or any inventory adjustments directly in the middle of that sequence previously existing. So we just want to make sure with that change to our costing layer that we have correct cost accounting throughout the process and our cost accounting is updated. Our third checklist close task is actually reviewing inventory for one-rolled accounts. We're able to look at the inventory values for each subsidiary, and I'll show you that again in our demo to follow. Finally, after we've performed all these tasks, we're able to view our inventory reports. We can navigate to reports and then inventory and select our desired reports. A great example was the inventory valuation report. As well, we want to go ahead and perform inventory record management at this point. This involves reviewing inventory records to consider whether we're going to be using them in the future, if they'd be inactive or active, and if we want to update those records in any manner. Okay, looking at our next task, this is the general ledger closing broad task. Within that, there's a number of period close checklist tasks, including revaluing open foreign currency balances, calculating consolidated exchange rates, eliminating intercompany transactions, and performing GL audit numbering. So looking at our first task, revaluation of open foreign currency balance, the purpose of this task in the period close checklist is to ensure that open transactions as of period end are accurately revalued for payment and reporting process. Key for this task is that it's primarily for open transactions, but it can also be applicable to foreign denominated bank balances. So let's look at an example. A US dollar-based currency company enters a customer invoice in euros on the 5th of the month, December 5th. The exchange rate at that point in time was 1.375. During the accounting period close process on the 31st, the open customer invoice will need to be revalued for the exchange rate difference on the 31st. On the 31st, we can assume that the exchange rate was 1.65, an increase there. Upon booking the foreign currency revaluation, the transaction would have an unrealized gain on currency translation. And I'll show you a transaction of that in our session to follow. Please note that this revaluation process can be performed anytime throughout the period, but it's a required task in our period close checklist. Further, there's reporting that we can view to see these unrealized gains or losses, and to navigate to that, we're going to go to Reports, Financial, and then unrealized gain or loss reports. Next, I want to discuss consolidated exchange rates. These are used for consolidated reportings for subsidiaries with different functional or base currencies, where the child subsidiaries will be reported in consolidation with the parent. This involves translation of the child subsidiary financial statements using the consolidated exchange rates to translate into the reporting parent functional or base currency. This task is the confirmation of the consolidated exchange rates to be used, and we'll demonstrate this in the next part of our session. Next, I'd like to discuss elimination of intercompany transactions. This feature will be used to create the elimination journal entries and the elimination subsidiary automatically. A common scenario where this is performed is an intercompany sales order and intercompany purchase order process, where the revenue, cost of goods sold, accounts receivable, and accounts payable will need to be eliminated. We'll demonstrate this in the period close checklist demo to follow. But again, this is performed automatically, which is a great plus, as in some systems you have to perform these calculations manually. Lastly, in the general ledger closing, we have GL audit numbering. The GL audit numbering function applies a gapless numbering sequence to all the general ledger posted transactions. And we'll be able to, as a user, to determine the frequency at which we want to number our transactions. Which is in the accounting preferences area. It's the GL audit numbering method field, and we can set that to either the base period, monthly, or yearly. And to go into this a little bit further, GL audit numbering, if we look at a transaction, we have a transaction number or a reference number, but also for audit standards, audit purposes, we have the ability to add a GL audit numbering sequence to those transactions based on transaction date, or order, or any other order number. So we'll look at that during our period close checklist and how we can create those GL audit numbering sequences. Further, once those sequences are determined, you can view a report to review those sequences at Reports, Financials, GL audit numbering report. Okay, approaching the end of our period close checklist. Our 9th task is closing all the previously locked tasks in the period close checklist. The purpose of this task is to close the previously locked task in the checklist, and here it's important to note the distinction between locked and closed. So previously with AR, AP, and lock all, that was a locking function, and that limits the activity that can be performed during the close process. Whereas at this point, when we get to closing, that actually prevents all activity from being performed. The admin has no access to go into those periods as well. You either have to open up the period, or depending on the change you'd have to make, which we'll discuss later on, do additional steps. We'll be reviewing the accounting period closure in the demo to follow. And just another note, we're completed with a checklist, but in addition to our discussion for closing accounting periods, we also want to discuss creating new accounting periods and reopening closed accounting periods. So for new period setup, we can set these all up based on a full year or a quarter, different increments. But to set these up, we'll go to Setup, Accounting, Manage Accounting Periods, and then I'd recommend Setup Full Year to align with your fiscal calendar. In NetSuite also, we're able to open closed accounting periods. It's important to consider the type of change required in the closed period. There are two types of changes that can be performed. There's GL changes, and then there's non-GL changes. If you need to perform GL impact changes, you're going to have to go ahead and reopen the accounting period. And I'll show you how to do that during our period close demo to follow the PowerPoint presentation. However, if it's a non-GL change, there's actually a setting within each accounting period and each individual accounting period where you can perform non-GL changes. That would be something where maybe you're updating a memo on a transaction or adding information, but really having no change in GL impact. And as we noted in our very first slide on accounting period permissions, there's actually a specific permission that you need to add there as well for allow non-GL changes. Lastly, NetSuite introduced a feature recently in 2016.2 called Quick Close. And that feature can be used to open or close multiple accounting periods with basically the click of a single button. We'll look at this in our demonstration to follow, which I will start into now. Okay, so I'm in here in one of our demo environments. This is Honeycomb Manufacturing, and I am looking currently at the Manage Accounting Period screen. I reach this screen by going to Setup, Accounting, Manage Accounting Periods. And we can see we have a number of periods. We have fiscal years. Within those fiscal years, we have quarters and months. Our base period is going to go ahead and be months. So overall, we're going to be focusing on closing December 2016. As you see, it's the next task in line to close. All these are unlocked for AP, AR, and all GL transactions. And also, we don't have a period close status checkbox. So let's go ahead. I'll dive into a closed period first, looking at our checklist here, our period closed checklist. I'll click on the magnifying glass. And we see each of these transactions has been performed for November 2016. We see a status of a check mark. So these will either be blank if they're not started. You'll have an ellipses or 3 dots in a row symbol if it's in progress. And once it's completed, you'll have a green check mark like so. It's also important to note that some of these tasks are interdependent and have locks based on what's been performed. So we'll look at those further. So that's a closed period. Let's go ahead and look at our December transaction. And we can see here, again, clicking on the magnifying glass, we have a number of periods that are open. And as noted, it's blank, meaning opened, for AR. And also, one other thing I just want to discuss before diving into the checklist too far, if we actually click on the text here of the period name, here's where we can click to allow our non-GL changes. We have to make sure that, again, we have permissions set, but we'd be able to click this checkbox and perform those non-GL changes. We can see that. Let's look at just January 15. In a historical period, we can go ahead and click that. You can see once the period's actually closed. So let's see, looking at permissions, I have pulled up here just a custom role I created, FMT Accountant. Overall, looking in the permissions sub-tab and setup sub-list, you see that I've added these permissions for allow non-GL changes and manage accounting periods. Those are the 2 primary permissions that you need. Certainly, you need access to other transactions throughout the system to perform the AR, AP closing, and also fixed assets. Let's see here. So starting in on the AR task, again, we want to ensure that we have all of our transactions entered into the system in the applicable period. We want to consider our concepts of cutoff, transaction date, and posting period. Once all those transactions are in the system, you can see, let me back up half a step here. I clicked on this Go To Task green arrow next to Lock AR to bring us into the Lock Accounting Period AR task. We can see the status is unlocked for December 2016. And we can see here I'm in a one-world environment. So I have multiple subsidiaries. I can pick and choose which subsidiaries I want to close this period for, or this task for, or I can mark all. If you're in a non-one-world, non-multi-subsidiary environment, you'll just have one company that you can close this for. And you'll have a lock all or a lock accounting AR period. So I'll click Submit here now that we've checked all those tasks. And we can see our status is updated to a green checkbox, meaning closed, and it was modified by me most recently. Further, after this is complete, we can view our reporting. Again, it's Reports, Customers, and Receivables. And then we can review a number of reports here, AR Aging, AR Register. We can also go ahead, after all the AR transactions are in the system, we can view our sales tax. And you can see here I have sales reports, sales tax US, and then we have sales tax by tax item, sales tax on sales, or sales tax by tax agency, whichever report you'd like to commonly use. If you have more questions on sales tax reporting, please let me know. Be glad to answer your questions there on how to best leverage NetSuite for that. And then further, once you're complete with those tasks, you can go ahead and review the customer records, decide what needs to be active or inactive under the System Information tab natively. You can also review your AR aging and decide which of those aging transactions are uncollectible. Let's see here. So next, after we have AR closed, we'd want to sequentially go into and lock AP. We don't have to go in that order, but that's just the recommended listing from NetSuite. We can see that we can lock any of these transactions technically at this point in time. I'll go into locking AP now by clicking this green arrow next to Go To Task. And again, we have a similar screen for locking AP. I see my status is unlocked for December 2016. And I can pick and choose which subsidiary is to lock this for, or I could just click Mark All and Submit. And we can click back into there, and we see now that it has a status of locked, and it has a current value with these lock icons as well. So after we have all the transactions entered for AP, and after we've gone through and done our lock AP task, and that way, once we lock AP, we're sure that nothing's going to shift in our reporting. So at that point, we can go ahead and look at our reports, vendors payables, and look at our AP aging and our AP register. We can also do vendor record management at this time. And ensure that we have inactivated any vendors we're no longer going to be doing business with, and we can update information on the vendor record. And we can also go ahead at this point and view our 1099 reporting. For 1099, that's also under Reports, Sales Tax US. And then we see down here at the bottom we have Form 1099 MIS and 1096. So I'll go ahead and just click into here, Form 1099 MIS. You see, actually, okay, this is a demo account. We don't have any we don't have any 1099 reportings in this section, but this is a fairly straightforward process. You'd be able to have numerous transactions in here based on each vendor would have their own section, and we'd be able to view the 1099 from the system with a preview link here and make sure everything's falling in the appropriate boxes. So after the lock AR and lock AP task have been performed, we're now able to go to our lock all task. And before I dive into that, I want to talk about these prerequisites. So you can see here prerequisite, hopefully you can see it on your screen. It says prerequisite lock all, meaning I have to complete the lock all task before this lock icon goes away and becomes a green arrow. Similarly, other tasks are dependent on subsequent tasks as well. We have review of negative inventory. That's prerequisite for that is resolve date period mismatches, which is right here. So you have to go in a sequence in order to allow you to perform the next task. Let's see here. So I'll go into lock all by clicking that green arrow. I'll click Mark All and Submit. Okay, and now that we've done our lock all, again, it's not part of our period close checklist task, but I wanted to discuss fixed asset closing. We're able to come into our fixed assets and go into transactions, perform any applicable transactions for the period, whether it's creating assets or generating assets from proposals, depreciating assets, disposals, revaluations, any asset splits. We're also able to view our reporting after the fact. And a great report for a roll forward I'd recommend is fixed assets, searches, asset register. And we're loading now. And we can see here when this report is natively generated, it has no data, primarily due to this date filter here. So if I go ahead, I can either update the filter, or I can go ahead and edit and remove that criteria. So I can say date is not before 2010. We're a little while past that. And we can see here I have a sample transaction in the system for a roll forward report. It's a IT server. It's depreciating currently. And it was placed in service in August. It has an asset life of 36 months. Original cost is $5,000. Acquisition is $5,000. We've depreciated $694.45. And we currently have not performed any revaluations, write-downs, or disposals, leaving us with our net book value. Certainly other ways to modify this report to present the data in a manner you'd like, but this is just the starting point in viewing this. Again, fixed assets, save searches, asset register. As well, there's a number of reports under fixed assets reports that we can generate. Okay. And as well, if you do not have the fixed asset register, or the fixed asset module rather, you'd have to perform this reporting externally to your system or perform some sort of save search in order to pull the appropriate data. Okay. So next, we can see that resolve date period mismatches has now been opened to us, as well as a few other period close tasks are available. I'm going to go sequentially down the list, and we're going to discuss resolving date period mismatches. I'll click this green arrow here. And we can see here, essentially we see it's not started, and we can go ahead and we can click resolve date period mismatches. We can see here it automatically, since we're in December 2016, I have the transaction that I entered yesterday for this demo, invoice HM39. The transaction date is 12/12/2016, but the period date is January 17. So we'd actually want to make sure that that's not going to happen, not unintended, and we'd want to get the transaction date in agreement with the posting period. So I can go ahead and click this edit link here, and then we can go ahead and make sure that our date is in agreement with our posting period. I'll just update that, and because I'm admin, I'm able to go into here and just do this right now. I'm able to make changes until we do the close task as admin. So that's one reason why I'm able to just jump right through. So now I'll go ahead and refresh my page, and we can see that that date period mismatch has been resolved. I'm able to go back to the period close task. We see a history of what's occurred here today, and I'm able to mark this task complete now. With that, the resolve date period mismatch now has a green checkbox. It's been closed. Again, if you want to prevent those processes or those transactions from posting incorrectly, wrong posting period, we can go to Setup, Accounting, Accounting Preferences. I'll open that in a new tab here. And we can see Allow Transaction Date Outside of Posting Period. So we have a few options here, either disallow, warn, or allow. That would greatly reduce your risk of having a unintended transaction date and posting period combination. And while we're on the screen, I'll come back to it, but here's our GL audit numbering method field that I was discussing a moment ago, where we can have it as our base period, quarter, or year. Okay. So overall, with that being completed, we're now able to begin our inventory closure tasks, which are these three tasks here: reviewing negative inventory, review inventory cost accounting, and review inventory activity. So I'll go ahead and start the review negative inventory task by clicking this green arrow. We see it's not started for December 2016. And I'll go ahead and click Say Review Negative Inventory. Again, as this is a test account, we've done a good amount of testing in here, and the inventory we're concerned about for our demo today is this item here, Alka-Seltzer, at our London location. We see somehow we have a -40 quantity. So maybe a item receipt got deleted, or maybe we overfulfilled a sales order. Whatever the issue may be, we're able to go ahead and review our inventory count that was performed and make sure that we have our inventory values in agreement with that inventory count. So we'd actually have to review those transactions, determine what the cause of this was, and then perform the appropriate inventory adjustment. Okay, so I'll go, we're not going to resolve that during today's session because that's digging into a number of transactions, but you'd be able to review those and post the appropriate adjustment. I'll go back to period close, and we'll go ahead and mark this task complete. You can see even with the negative inventory, it does let me push through. You don't have to have it positive, but it's just a forewarning and allows you the opportunity to review that negative inventory. So our second task now for inventory closure is reviewing inventory cost accounting. Again, this would be if you had a sequence of transactions, inventory related transactions, and then maybe you inserted a adjustment, an inventory adjustment, or inserted sales, inserted purchasing transactions, just in the middle of that sequence of transactions. With that, you're disturbing or changing the costing layers of the inventory. and the system would want to recalculate to make sure that the costing layers are appropriately applied to the transactions. So for this task, I found it rare that you'll see really this task populate a great deal of information. NetSuite has a real-time costing engine that actually updates transactions shortly after they're performed. So typically those are performed moments after the transaction is updated and not waiting until we perform this step. But nonetheless, it's a period close checklist task, so I'll click the green arrow next to it, and we'll start inventory costing review. So we'll see here I can, it's not started task. I'll click review inventory cost accounting. And it's going to go ahead and take a while. It's not running. But it also says that the cost calculation has been completed, meaning the real-time costing engine has ran previous to us performing this period close checklist task. And so we're good to go. It'll advise you on which items you have left for cost calculation, so you can monitor this and then review the cost accounting outcome. I'll click back to period to close, and we can mark this task complete now. And thirdly, we can go ahead and review the inventory activity. I'll go ahead and click this green arrow here next to review inventory activity. We'll click review inventory activity here. And we can see for each subsidiary for our applicable date range of December, we can see the quantity for each item. So you can review this and ensure everything is okay. Further, we can look at these. The Alka-Seltzer transaction, for example, we can see all the invoices, item fulfillments, receipts, all the transactions related to that inventory item to ensure that it's correct. So I'll go ahead and we can customize this. If there's nothing incorrect or nothing to customize with this, we can go ahead and hit back and mark this task complete as well. So now that we've confirmed and locked down all of our inventory-related tasks, we can go ahead and review our inventory reports since we're positive nothing's going to change on us. I'll go to Reports, Inventory and Items, and then we can review the various desired reports here, such as inventory valuation. Okay, so that brings us to general ledger closing. We have the revalue open foreign currency balances, calculate consolidated exchange rates, and eliminate intercompany transactions, and lastly, GL audit numbering. So I'll start with revalue of open foreign currency balances. I'll click the green arrow here. And we're going to go ahead and click currency revaluation. And again, an example of this, just so we're all familiar, essentially just envision we have a US-based dollar company invoicing a customer in euro. Maybe the invoice is dated December 5th with an exchange rate of 1.375. During the period close on the 31st, we need to revalue that open customer invoice in a foreign currency to the exchange rate as of the period end, December 31st. So we'll go ahead and use this process to go ahead and create those unrealized gain or loss automatically. The realized, some of you may be asking, what about the realized gain or loss to follow? NetSuite will actually book the realized gain or loss upon settlement of the transaction. So upon receiving payment of the invoice or payment to a vendor, it'll reverse out the unrealized gain or loss and book a realized gain or loss at that point in time. And you'll have to make sure that you set those accounts accordingly. So overall, I have a sample transaction in the system for our subsidiary Honeycomb Manufacturing. And we can perform revaluation for a number of these transactions you can see. But I'll go ahead, we're focusing mainly on AR here. I'll go ahead and hit Save. And now this should be in our status. I'll refresh. We can see that the status is completed. It's produced one transaction, 100%. And we can look at our results. Let's see here. So I will look at our reports, financial, unrealized exchange rate gain or loss. And we can see, let's minimize these so we have a cleaner view. Looking for, I'm going to look at 3M was my sample transaction. So we can see here my transaction entered on December 5th was an exchange rate of 1.375, 1.38. And then as of period end, we had an exchange rate of 1.65. So it actually performed a revaluation in this journal entry here. And we're revaluing it from our open amount, which was $108, that's including tax, at the opening exchange rate, on the entry exchange rate. And then it's being valued up to $178.61 based on the ending period exchange rate. And we can see that here further, looking at the invoice for 3M, 1.375 to 1.65, and we're incurring a $29 gain. So that concludes the currency revaluation. I'll go back to our task here and click Mark Complete. And we're able to move on to our next task. So for that, that's calculation of consolidated exchange rates. I'll go ahead and click the green arrow. And again, this is for consolidated reporting. So it's one world, multi-subsidiary environment where your child subsidiaries are consolidated into a parent subsidiary. We'll use a number of different exchange rates based on the account being translated into the parent's reporting. And I'll show you that now. So I'll go ahead and click Calculate Consolidated Exchange Rates. And we can see here for each of the subsidiaries, from subsidiary to subsidiary relationship, it wants us to assign a current value, an average exchange rate, or historical. So current is going to be used for translating all of your balance sheet accounts other than equity accounts from the child to the parent. Average is going to be used for translating all your income statement accounts, income and expense, and retained earnings from the child to the parent reporting requirement. And historical is going to be used for equity and fixed assets potentially. So we can see here we have the ability to edit these manually if you'd like. We have our pencil icon here. Further, we have our grid edit turned on. So we could go ahead and update those to use an exchange rate at your that's desired. We can also just use this calculate button to get everything back to where we want it to be. So I'll go ahead after we update and ensure all that our from and to relationships and all of our current average and historical rates are assigned accordingly. We can go ahead back to our period close and mark this task complete. So with this, we're now on to our elimination of intercompany transactions. I'll go ahead and click this green arrow here. And we can see the purpose of this this period close checklist task is to create the elimination journal entries and the elimination subsidiary. Again, a common scenario is we have intercompany sales orders and intercompany purchase orders where the revenue, cost of goods sold, accounts receivable will need to be eliminated to present accurate financials. I'll go ahead and click Run Intercompany Elimination. And I'll go ahead and I'll hit Save. With this, we see the status is pending. We're going to give it a few moments here. And it should now be 99% complete. Let's give it a little bit more time, and we should be able to see these elimination entries that are performed. Prior to the demo, I created a purchase order with the intercompany and created the sales order, managed intercompany sales orders to produce that, and performed the item fulfillments, item receipts, vendor billing, and invoicing all on the system. So all those transactions were existing prior to this demo, and we're just looking at the elimination here. So status is now 100% complete. We can see here in our results, we can view our elimination journal entry in these new tabs at the top. So here we're eliminating intercompany AP and AR. This is actually for numerous transactions. As well, we have intercompany cost of goods sold and sales being eliminated, crediting our COGS, debiting our income, elimination. And this is occurring in the elimination subsidiary. So with that, we're confident that all of our eliminations have been performed automatically. And we'll click this task, Mark Complete. Getting close to the end, we have GL Audit Numbering. I'll go ahead and click this green arrow here. And again, GL audit numbering, this is a gapless numbering sequence to all the GL posted transactions. It's going to be different than your reference numbers or your transaction numbers, and it's used for auditing purposes. The user can set the increments on which they want to assign these GL numberings. So what I mean by that, if we go to Setup, Accounting Preferences, and if we look at GL audit numbering method, we're able to determine when we want to assign these GL audit numbers. We can either assign them monthly, quarterly, or yearly. So I've just selected monthly to to demonstrate this process. And we can see here on GL audit numbering, that's the reason why I have this task on a monthly basis. I'll go ahead and click GL audit numbering. At this point, we can define, it carries over any previously defined GL audit numbering sequences, and we can further that process. So here, I've just named this November. I'll call it December, or company, whatever you want to call your GL audit numbering sequence. And a one-world environment, I can say which subsidiaries the sequence applies to. I could do multiple rows with different prefixes, suffixes, things of that nature. Based on subsidiary context. I can define a prefix. I can define a suffix to our GL audit numbering. We can define a minimum number of digits, and we can define a starting number, an initial number. You can see that I ran this in November, so I already have 5 transactions that have been numbered. And we can go ahead and use our ordering by. We can either order by transaction entry date or transaction date. Those are the 2 options. So I'll hit OK here since I've updated, and hit Save. And then from here, I'll click this Apply based on which subsidiary combinations, and click Run. And let's give this a few moments of time. Okay, 100% complete now. 61 numbers assigned. To go ahead and review this, we can go ahead, Reports, Financial, GL audit numbering down here at the bottom. And on a side note, when we were discussing consolidated exchange rates, you have your CTA balance audit, which is a very helpful report. I failed to mention that earlier. So go ahead and look into that if you have a multi-subsidiary environment at your leisure. So overall now, getting back into GL audit numbering, I can go ahead and refresh this just for December. And we can see here we have our document number, invoice numbers, journal entries, whatever it may be. But we also have our GL audit number right here in this column. So you see I tried to make it simple. I have prefix, so whichever prefix you want to define, maybe your company initials, minimum of 7 digits, and where the transaction left off. So these are all related to, this is number 6 here for this single currency revaluation. We have a 7th and a 7th, an 8th all the way down, and so on and so forth. So that's how we can review that, make sure that we have, again, it's a gapless sequence, so we don't have any gaps. We have 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's not 9, 20, 100. It shows that no transactions have been removed or added for that nature. So I'll click back here now that that's been performed. I'll click back to period close task, and I'll mark this task complete. And with that, we are ready to perform our close. We have, this is finally open. We have the green arrow next to close. I'll click the green arrow, and we can see it's the status of opened for December. We're able to click the closed period. And now this is officially a status of a closed period. I'll go back to my list overall, and I can see that for December 2016, our period closed task has been completed. It's in agreement with all the other closed periods. If I wanted to go ahead and now open this transaction again, maybe I have to make changes, an audit, GL change or non-GL change. Again, for a non-GL change, I can click the name of the period. And now I can click allow non-GL changes to make sure the user that needs to make the change has the permissions. If it's a GL change, we need to actually go into here to the checklist once more. Back into closed, we can see it's a green arrow. We'll enter there. And we have to define a justification. So I'll put a justification in there so we can see why this period is being reopened. It's mandatory. And I'll click reopen period. And we see a note here, reopening this period means it'll reopen all subsequent periods. They'll remain locked, but they'll be unclosed. And we discussed the difference between closing and locking earlier in the session. So further with that, we're getting very close to the end here and time for questions. I'm going to go ahead and, if we look at setup, accounting, manage accounting periods, we can go ahead and set up a full year by clicking the setup full year, or set up new quarters or base periods, whatever we'd want to do. We can click that and begin our setup process for another year. And lastly, NetSuite introduced a functionality called Quick Close. So that is, you see this close multiple periods, and let's see what we have open. We have up to December. So if I go set up accounting, manage accounting periods, we can come into here. I'll do a search for quick find or quick close. And you see here I have it checked, allow quick close of accounting periods. It also requires permissions to access those quick close, and you have to assign those out. And then with that, I can, instead of going through each of those tasks, I can go ahead and click close accounting periods. And let's see here, no accounting periods closed. Give me one moment. And we should be able to close through December. Okay, so that's not showing me, I must not have a setting configured, but we would be able to essentially say April 2017, let's just close straight to here. Once that's performed, we're able to close January, February, March. It just marks those tasks complete. Note that it's not automatically doing those tasks for you. It's just merely letting you bypass those periods. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at any questions that have been asked during the session. If you have further questions following the session, please reach out. There's multiple email addresses in the packet, the training guide sent out before the session, and we'd be glad to follow up there.
Yeah, Joe, it looks like we got a couple direct questions here. If I need to reopen a closed period that has multiple closed periods before it, do I have to reopen each period?
No, that goes into what we're that warning message that just appeared when we went ahead and clicked. Here, I'll show you. If I click review period close checklist, I'll unclick close, and let's put another test too. I'll reopen the period, and reopening this period means all subsequent periods will be open. They'll stay locked, but the close will be removed. So no.
All right. Looks like we have one more. Do all transactions edits require the periods to be reopened?
No, they don't. We have to go ahead and we can go ahead and click the allow non-GL changes. These are actually frequently asked questions as well in our document. So you can go ahead and we tried to put a few in the last 2 or 3 pages of the document that might help address any other questions you have. Anything else?
No, looks like those are all the questions. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any other questions, I'll be following up with all the attendees, so feel free to ask me at that time. We do truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and we hope to see you at our future events. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.